Trump joked that Canada should become America's 51st state. Can you put that graphic up? Because I think the president-elect put that out. Looking towards Canada and saying, hey, you should be the 51st state. Are you offended by that?
I think President Trump has a great sense of humor.
Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. You've seen the meme from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump as part of a joke that America will annex Canada as its 51st state. Will internet memery now be a hallmark of U.S.-Canada relations? And what does this say about how Canada is viewed by America's head of state? Here to discuss is your friend and mine, a political commentator and YouTuber based here in Vancouver. He is JJ McCullough, and this is The Crunch. So JJ, a lot of attention has been focused on tariffs and border security that Donald Trump is demanding from Canada. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the way Donald Trump has basically communicated to the world about Canada, making jokes about us, making memes. What does this mean for our country?
Well, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Because Donald Trump obviously speaks in a very undisciplined kind of just stream of consciousness.
To say the least.
Every thought that sort of crosses his mind is expressed. And one of the ways that that can manifest is in sort of horrible, bigoted, offensive statements. But other times he just kind of like throws out ideas that are kind of in the sort of public consciousness, but are very rarely expressed by like leading political figures. And this whole idea of like, why isn't Canada part of the US is, I think, a very common sort of kind of casual sentiment that I think a lot of Americans have, and even a substantial number of Canadians have. And so what's been really interesting is just the degree to which he sort of through force of character has kind of thrust that conversation into mainstream, polite, respectable discourse in the way that he does from time to time. We might recall a few years ago when he was musing about like, why doesn't America just buy Greenland? You know, like it seems like a sort of preposterous idea, but it is like the kind of thing that just ordinary people do sort of muse about. And I think that that is one of Trump's, I guess in a way, like political talents, is that he can force us to kind of have conversations that we kind of just put aside, but in some ways, like we're now kind of forced to like, why isn't Canada part of the U.S.? Is there any case to be made for us joining the U.S.?
But he's not being serious in these memes or in these statements.
No, but he can provoke serious conversations despite being an unserious figure.
Right. I just feel like historically, if any country was to speak this way about another country, that would be antagonism, right? Like that would be a big crisis.
Yes.
And yet, even though maybe some Canadians are offended, a lot of Americans and even Alberta Premier Danielle Smith are just kind of laughing it off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, but that's what I mean, right? Like we don't, what's the famous line? You take Trump seriously, but not literally, right? So it's like, even though like literally is America going to annex Canada and make it the 51st state? It's like, no, but is there sort of like a space in there? Is there some sort of like kernel of a legitimate point in there about US-Canada relations? And I think that there is. Like, I think that there is like a legitimate conversation to be had about making Canada and the US closer at the expense of Mexico, which I do think is kind of like the real world manifestation of this idea. Not that we're going to join the US as a state, but that maybe like the relationship is ultimately going to be a bilateral one as opposed to a trilateral one.
Interesting, bringing us closer and yet with more stringent borders, which is effectively what Donald Trump wants. Now, I don't want to get into that, but you know, you're online, you see the discourse. What has the reaction been from Canadians online when it comes to Donald Trump's jokes?
Well, this is what I mean, and this is what I find interesting about it, right? Is because I feel like you and I sort of grew up probably, or were sort of acclimatized to believe that the idea of like Canada-US integration is like just a completely preposterous idea, off the table, never going to happen in a million years. It's dumb and bad and toxic and dangerous, and America's blah, 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 right? But what I think you've sort of seen is that with some of the younger generation who perhaps weren't sort of culturalized in the same sort of fashion, they're surprisingly open-minded about it and just kind of curious about it and just having, I think, kind of like more nuanced conversations about it. I mean, a number of people have asked me, they say, are you going to make a video about this? I am. And just like, well, why isn't Canada going to join the US? What do you think about Canada joining the US? You know, it's like I said before, it's a conversation that I think ordinary people have or roll over in their brains a bit more than I think a kind of closed-minded media elite has ever been willing to entertain.
Wow.
You know?
Really closed-minded media elite.
Well,
thank you for that.
No, me too, right? I mean, like, as somebody who is more kind of like open-minded about US-Canada integration, like even I know that like, well, you know, there's a certain line you don't cross and you never raise the statehood issue, right? But now it's just like Trump again, like he just kind of like wills us into having conversations that we wouldn't ordinarily think about having.
Would the reaction from Canadians be different if we had a popular prime minister in charge? Because I do wonder how much of the rah-rah Trump stuff we might see from some Canadians would be different if they actually liked our prime minister.
I think there's probably something to that, but I do think that like Canadian culture has changed in a way in which we're probably just a little bit less militantly anti-American and nationalistic than perhaps we used to be. I think that like the Liberal Party and this current prime minister has some responsibility for that. You know, like when Trudeau sort of says like his famous line about the post-national country and this kind of stuff. There is no real way to be Canadian. Everything sort of, and that contrasts with sort of like the rah-rah nationalism of somebody like Prime Minister Chrétien, who I think was more openly anti-American than say Justin Trudeau has been. So I don't know, like, is there still a kind of latent nationalism in Canada that could be harnessed by a more effective, political leader? Maybe. But I also kind of think that Canada's maybe sort of transcended nationalism in that kind of way.
Put our viewers at ease. The United States is not going to annex our country.
No, the U.S. is not going to annex our country, but, who knows what the future is going to be in terms of how Canada-U.S. relations will work. Are we always going to stay sort of two countries with a militarized border? Maybe not. Maybe we'll become something more like Europe. Maybe we'll become something more like the relationship that England and Ireland have with each other. There's lots of different ways to imagine the future of this relationship. And I think if there is a silver lining to the Trump administration, it's that we kind of think bigger and think in sort of more creative ways than we've previously allowed ourselves to.
Fascinating food for thought. JJ, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Angelo Isidoro and JJ McCullough for their time tonight. If you have any thoughts about tonight's show, please shoot me an email, mo@thisisvancolour.com. Also, please follow me on all the social media, including Blue Sky, @VANCOLOUR, and please don't cancel me. We'll be back next week at a special time, 9:30 p.m. on December 19th for This Is VANCOLOUR's Christmas holiday episode. But for now, this is VANCOLOUR, and I'm Mo Amir, telling you that in a province where you can be anything, be colorful. Peace.